And we are back. Welcome to the Natural Awakening podcast with me, your host, Wisdom. And today we have Gabe, probably better known to most people listening to this, if you are aware of him, as Vivid Void on Twitter. Welcome, Gabe. You're coming to us live from the Colorado mountains, which you've recently moved out to. And just before we hit record, we were talking a little bit about how life is up there. You said you got the Milky Way in your backyard. I can't say I'm not a little bit envious from where I'm sitting with light pollution in a city.
It's a really unique place. I don't know anywhere else in the U.S. that's like this, but it's just a lucky to be situated in the mountains just the way we are. It blocks out all the light pollution, and if I need something from town, it's still only a couple minutes away. So pretty lucky spot.
Speaking of land and where one lands and where one sprouts grew up from, where was that for you? Where were you born? Yeah.
I was born in Orange County, California, in a city called Costa Mesa, um, not too far from Newport Beach. It's about an hour south of Los Angeles. Um, sometimes people call it the New Jersey of LA, which is not a bad way to put it. Uh,
So do you get all of the hate that New Jersey does from New Yorkers? Is that a
not from
similar
not
dynamic?
there's a little less. LA looks down its nose a little less at Orange County than New York does at New Jersey, but not much. Um, but yeah, I grew up in Costa Mesa. I was there for the first 10 years of my life. Extremely Catholic family. I grew up in the same religious community as Amy Coney Barrett, the Supreme Court
Okay.
Justice. It's called City of the Lord. And then when I was 10, we moved to Portland, Oregon, and joined another religious community that was up there called the People of Praise. And so I was raised
Another
in
Catholic
that,
one, or
another Catholic community. Yeah. So it was very traditional in some ways. It's a very kind of small, obscure branch of Catholicism called charismatic Catholicism. It blends sort of some of the parts of Pentecostal or evangelical um, Christianity with, like a very traditional, not quite like Latin Mass, but a very traditional form of Catholicism. And so, yeah, that
and
was
are they part of the
that's,
broader communion? Do they recognize papal authority? I mean, my religious nerd
yeah,
side is coming out here. I want to know all
yeah,
about.
absolutely. Yeah, they're
Yeah,
Catholic.
yeah, yeah.
There's no
They're
question
Catholic.
about that.
Catholic. It's not a breakaway. Yeah,
Right, right. They're part of the whole organization. They're part of the church. They're
yeah,
just kind of elect to do things um, more cloistered, a little more intense, a little more hardcore.
And
So
what did that look like
yeah,
for you growing up in that community? Were you an altar boy? Did you go to church every day, or what? How did that manifest?
I was an altar boy. We didn't go to church every day, but I did go to Catholic school. And we would sometimes go to weekly mass. My parents really wanted me to be a priest. That was really
Hmm.
important to them. And they
Really?
put a lot of pressure on me to do that. Um, so that was a pretty regular staple of my life was so it's something that's I guess germane to this is my father was a seminarian and my mother was in the
Hmm.
convent when they met, and they
Wow.
decided to leave their respective religious orders and have a family, and so they had high hopes for me, and my
Well,
sister too. My
we
sister
fell into
got
relationship, so this is second chance. We could make a go of
yeah.
it where we didn't.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a very strict upbringing. It was a very repressed upbringing. It was a very much more so than I think you would expect from a regular on the street Catholic.
Sure.
I wouldn't say that it was a cult that I was a part of, but it was something kind of in between. This religious
Yeah.
community was something kind of in between. In terms of the sort of intense identity pressure
Sure.
that existed in
And
there.
the conformity, especially on a young child. I mean, that's a lot.
It was a lot. Yeah. Yeah. So I rebelled as a teenager, like one does. I had a lot of, I guess, had a lot of I'm just telling my life story now. Should I just do
Yeah,
that? Just roll into
yeah,
it.
yeah. That's where we're starting.
A lot of problems with my parents, and sort of like weird. I just had a lot of questions about the theology, and I had a lot of questions about the religion, and it was things that the priests that I talked to were like, oh yeah, of course, like why wouldn't you ask these questions? And my parents were just horrified that I was like
Well, that's
questioning the faith.
that's
And
good. At
so
least that the priests were
they didn't
open. Often they're not.
recognize, yeah, yeah, they didn't recognize um, that the curiosity was a good thing. And this caused problems, and eventually, sort of caused enough problems that, uh, I came to pretty serious loggerheads with my parents, had some pretty serious family issues that stemmed from just major differences that we had, and I eventually left the church at 18. Um, so I kind of left and I said, I think this isn't for me, and I don't think I believe in this anymore. And but really, there was a real grief and pain as I was walking out of the church because there was a part of, there's a deep part of me um, that I kind of had to shove away. I kind of had to silence in order to walk out of there. It wasn't a clean question, is there a God or is there not a God? I just felt like I have to believe there isn't one, and I have to become a
Hmm.
militant Reddit atheist. Reddit wasn't a thing back then, but you know what I'm talking
Sure.
about. I had to become
I
like a
know the
new
character. Yeah.
atheist guy. Yeah, and I had to do this in order to run really far away from the church, um, and yeah, so I spent sort of a few years adrift, and met a lady, and had a whirlwind romance and fell in love, and got married and had a baby, and then realized I had no idea how to be a man. So I needed to be a dad fast, and I was like, how can I learn this fast? And so I joined the Marines. Um, and I was in the Marines for 7 years, and that was a whole new, almost occult identity that I got to,
Hmm.
find my certainty and wrap myself in this very intense identity. And um, the Marines are a warrior cult. They're a state-sanctioned warrior cult, but they're kind of a cult in the way that AA is a cult. It's like an accessory
Hmm.
set of beliefs that you can kind of like slot on the top of whatever your existing religion is.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and which I actually think America specializes in, is very good at. Um,
Accessory civic cults,
accessory
and they talk
civic
about
cults,
civic
yeah.
religion. Yeah.
Yeah, or just accessory
Yeah.
cults broadly. I mean, like there
Yeah.
are,
Yeah.
you know, uh,
Very, very fertile land for fertile cultural
if
psychofauna soil for the
it's like a
generation of cults and
sign
new
of
religious movements.
American. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, no, no. That was it. That's my
Uh,
comment. Go on.
I genuinely think it's like a sign of the health of our society when there's a lot of religious entrepreneurs, when there's a lot of religious innovation. Like we're just a really, really religious people. And when we're feeling optimistic and when we're like engaged with the mystery and engaged with all of that, like if there's not like genuine innovation coming out, spiritual innovation and religious innovation happening, I think America's in a slump.
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, I think well, this is a slight diversion, but I mean, I think
Yeah, sure.
sociologists of religion are split on this. Some are, we'll see, general societal malaise or crisis as a generative force for new religious movements, breaking away from orthodoxy, breaking away from more conservative um, religious structures. But I can see it go both. Some people double down on the conservative, on the steadfast pillars of religious conformity, and some people uh, branch out. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think it's both.
Yeah,
Times of
you're
crisis
probably right.
and times of health, both.
Sure. Sure. I think that um well, I guess this will get way off on a diversion if we start jumping into this, but
I mean,
you could say
it's a
that
free flowing conversation.
In America somebody thinks there's a crisis at all times. The chaos is the point. Like we're a perpetually dissatisfied people, even more so than people are dissatisfied in
Compared to the
general.
world average, you think?
Yeah, I think so. I do. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, I mean, certainly there's a whole question about conformity and ossification and dogma and all of that stuff. And there's actually really interesting, I think, like intersections with developmental psychology and like who needs the conformity and who needs the dogma. There are times in one's life where certainty is the most meaningful thing, and that is just a human. That's just a human attractor basin at one point in one's life. And so then the question is not like, is dogma good or bad? It's like, well, which dogma and what's it doing for you? And does it have an escape route? Or does it have a method to develop you into a more mature disciple of your faith, or whatever the case might be? Um, yeah, so the Marine Corps does not have any of that. That one's just pretty powerful dogma. So I did that until I was 30, um, and then really kind of found myself lost and didn't really know what to do. I hadn't
When you had
really
left that community,
matured,
starting to switch careers, coming out of that.
but coming out of the Marines, yeah, like
Yeah.
not having that identity to lean on as much, and really seeing how it was like detrimental to my relationships, certainly my relationship to my now 7-year-old child. Um, realizing like I really need to learn how to be gentle, but I don't really know how, and I need to learn how to get in touch with these more, fatherly, humane traits of myself, but I don't know how. And then I was looking. I knew I was hurt. I knew I had some real trauma from growing up, and my father was schizophrenic, and sort of his demons haunted the home. And I
Gotcha.
knew that, just being near, just a proximity to a parent's psychosis for a child is deeply unstabilizing. And he was a very loving man and occasionally a very frightening man, but generally like really meant well for us. But his instability really hurt all of us. And in a way that not, nobody, there's no judgment to be cast on that, you know. But later in life, I knew I had a lot of trauma and a lot of stuff to deal with, and um, a little bit of definitely some stuff to work through from the Marine Corps and stuff that I'd internalized. And so I started looking for a therapist, and I went through like 7 different people and was like, none of you people know what the hell you're talking about. What are we doing here? And then like the 8th guy that I went and saw like lumbered into the room, like 6'4", wearing a utilikilt, um, like like
Unconventional dress for a therapist. That's
it,
sick.
it
That's a
he
signal.
was, yeah, Air Force veteran. He was a biker, he was in a motorcycle gang when he was younger, and um and this guy like came in and defeated every one of my attempts to charm or make him think I was intelligent, or make him think that this guy just defeated all of my defenses basically very quickly, and then was like, it's time to grow up, basically. And I was like, oh shit. But in a very loving way. Like he was very loving and very good about it. And I worked with him for like 2 years until I stopped mistaking him for my dad. And and uh and then I left for like 6 months. But I thought every day I was thinking about this transformation that I had working through trauma, like working through sort of inch by tortured inch, just learning to tell the truth of, this is who I am, this is what happened to me, this is what I did to other people. Like this is, here's all the nasty parts of being a human being that I'm just going to come to terms with in front of you. And this guy just kept having mercy on me, just over and over. Like I was sure this is the next thing I'm going to tell you, some weakness or some sin, and this is the thing that's gonna do it. And he would always be like, well, that's human. Do you have amends to make? And I'd be like, holy shit, really? Um,
You're not going to cast me out. I'm
yeah,
not rejected
exactly.
for
Yeah, you're not
this.
going to reject
You're
me. You're
not
not going to
disowning me
abandon me.
entirely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And this really healed something. I do not think I was ever unconditionally loved by someone until him. I don't think my
Mm,
parents were capable of it, as
mm,
I don't think they received it either. You know.
yeah.
But it
Yeah.
was really transformational for me. I think it is for everyone. And so I went back to this guy after like 6 months, after I stopped working with him, and I was like, look, I don't want therapy anymore, but I want to seek enlightenment. Can you help me? And he was
And what did
like,
that
I
mean to
don't
you at the
know.
time?
Yeah, exactly. He didn't even bother asking. He said, I don't know, but he had this kind of twinkle in his eye. Um, so we did a lot of work from there, and he kind of became my spiritual director, and there were therapeutic elements to it. Certainly, what we were looking for was anything that pulled me out of the present, or anything that was compulsive, or anything that um, you know, caused me to become so emotional that I became compulsive, or lost control of my actions, or just acted unskillfully. And then I would come in and we would pick it apart, and he would say, well, here's what CBT has to say about it, here's what psychodynamic has to say about it, and here's what, so on and so forth. And it kind of helped me look at it from different, and tried a bunch of different stuff, fasts and celibacy, and in a way it was my priest training, you know, that I didn't get from the Catholic Church because they didn't know what to do with me.
You didn't follow your parents' wish and go to seminary.
No, I didn't. I went and did it privately with some weirdo in Portland. Um, um, I did not attain enlightenment. Like that's an important part of the story. But working toward it, I had some pretty extraordinary experiences, and had some pretty extraordinary openings of my heart, and feeling my body for the first time in 20 years, and all of these kind of wonderful things that happened. And finally we got to a point, it was during COVID, that he was like, look, I don't have anything left to teach you. You need to go to the mountains. And you need to go sit there in strong determination meditation until it's done. And I didn't really know what that meant. So I was like, well, how much time should I spend there? He's like, I don't know. And I was like, well, how much time do I take off of work, buddy? Like, what am I supposed to do here? And he's like, listen. And he gave me this little short work by Miyamoto Musashi that's called Dokodo, or the Way of Walking Alone. And this is his way of saying, like, get the hell out of my office, So it took me like 2 more years until my son was old enough that he was able to be independent, and I was able to, go on the road and go to the mountains and do this. And then, and yeah, and that was that to me. So I did go, I did sit, I did have a really like wonderful and mystical experience out there. And I came back and talked to him for the first time in 3 years and said, is this what you expected? He was like, yeah, that's what I expected. And, he's like, let's talk a little bit about it. And we talked a little bit about it and sort of situated it in context. And it really felt like in a way, my apprenticeship was sort of over. Like I really did feel at that point kind of like a journeyman standing on my own feet. And that was this summer, so I'm 42, and I was doing a bit of counseling and a bit of teaching and a bit of that stuff before, but I really feel like I arrived at an ability to do that. And I sort of got his blessing to do it as well. So it.
So how do you navigate that professional? It's a very professionalized space, the counseling or the therapeutic. But then there's what a whole bunch of people actually on Teapot or Twitter or just in general, this kind of less institutionally licensed kind of space that is operating kind of alongside that whole therapeutic industrial complex.
Sure.
What was that process for you? I'm curious on that side. What are your thoughts on that?
It's even more complex. It's even more complex of a picture than that, because the therapy industrial complex is sort of here, and then you've got private practice is out here, and then you've got real like sort of spiritual weirdos who are still working within the confines of therapeutic ethics and therapeutic, but they're willing to use spirituality as well, which
Right.
you can't do in traditional psychotherapy out of respect for the other individual and their spiritual beliefs. So it's only a deconstructive tradition. And then outside of that, you have, where you have a lot of just the spiritual Wild West. You have the astrologers, and you have the gurus, and you have the all those people, and of course there's like,
and then more traditional religious stuff.
Sure. Well, yeah. I don't really think of them as working within the therapeutic paradigm, but I guess there are some very liberal churches that certainly incorporate psychotherapy, and Tillich made made a wonderful case that psychotherapy is like a new skin for the old theological ceremony, and just about everything they're pointing to is like
Confession. Yeah. I mean,
old, yeah, exactly, right? Like, yeah. I mean, you could go back to the beginning and start from William James, and you would have basically all the same concepts, and you would have basically all the same. Um, but anyway, you work with what you got. So how do I work in this space? I am not licensed, and I don't do therapy. So therapy is a very particular frame, and a particular relationship that has to be maintained in a pretty specific way. What I do is I call it counseling, but it's much closer to ministry than therapy. So if someone comes to me and they've got a severe personality disorder, or they've got like a really deep obsession, or a really deep paranoia, or something like that, I don't have the technical ability to deal with that. There really are many mental illnesses that are like well served by treating them like medical problems. That not all of them are served well that way. The medical model fails in many instances, but there are some that it's very important to have a doctor. It's very important to have somebody who holds that. So I do hold the therapeutic ethics. I don't ever go into business with my clients. I don't ever date them. Nothing like that. But I'm willing to be more personal, and I'm willing to disclose a lot more of my own life. I'm willing to be more of a kind of mix of a coach and a sponsor and a spiritual friend, and all of those things. And I don't mind giving advice from time to time. I don't believe the same things that therapists do, that somehow it strips the dignity of the other person, because they're still free to say fuck your advice, like and so I think as long as people are experimenting and seeing for themselves and really figuring out what works for them, and that's something that I'm able to help them do, and maybe give them an outside perspective, and maybe confront them when they're pretty obviously not being honest with themselves, or when they're, when they've hurt someone else, or they've got a relationship that's wounded and they're not owning they're a part of that. That's something that I can go in and say, this isn't going to get better until you do. Because that's not like, we can do the transference countertransference thing. You can heal some of your relationship problems, but you can't heal a wound that exists in another relationship within within a dyadic healing relationship. No, you can practice until the thought of it doesn't give you a panic attack, and then you can go try to fix it, if it's possible. And certainly you can come to some resolution, within transference and countertransference dynamics that with people who have passed away, or people who are dangerous to have relationships with, or whatever the case is. Like, there is healing available there, but the relationship, the original relationship carries the wound, so there's only so much you can do in these meetings, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And on that, I mean, it sounds kind of like a model of, like sponsorship or pastoral care, and also, peer mentor, all of that kind of mixed, mixed and filtered through your particular life experience and what skills and tools you have to offer, which is interesting. And I think useful. And I think many people are disconnected from the communities in which that kind of relationship would be offered in a more traditional context. Like, oh, I just have, like, I'm kind of confused and lost in my life or in this relationship, and I don't really need to see a therapist, but I'm not. There are many people who are in that kind of situation. And what would you do 50, 100 years ago? You'd go talk to the priest. And maybe he'd give you shitty advice, and maybe he wouldn't know, his ass from his head. But, but that would be who you would go talk to.
That'd be available. Yeah.
Yeah. And most people
you would
don't have that.
That's true. Yeah. But you would also have a bunch of, even 50 years ago, you would have a bunch of informal mentors, and you would have older men and older women. You'd be talking with them on a more regular basis. So, the issues that come up in your relationship, you'd be like, yeah, like my wife's doing this thing or my husband's doing this thing, and you would have 3 or 4 older people to be like, yeah, of course, like, yeah, and we all go through that. And here's how I dealt with it, and here's how I dealt with it, and here's how I dealt with it. And you'd get that perspective, you'd have that cultural knowledge, and yeah, we don't have that, and to some extent, there is kind of a crisis of a lack of elders in among the baby boomers. I don't in most times I don't like judge them for that. I think the traumas of the World War landed on them especially hard because they were the kids of the people who got wrecked by industrial warfare and industrial slaughter. And so they had these sort of immense psychological wounds, but no war of their own to point to that caused it. And those, and then at the same time that modernity was stripping the meaning out of everything and stripping the authority out of culture and the authority out of tradition and the authority out of traditional sources of ways of navigating the world, we got this explosion of creativity and wealth. And that's been wonderful, and certainly don't hate that. But the cost of it was pretty enormous. And
I mean, now we have something that people are referring to as the meta crisis, the meaning crisis. I mean, the meta crisis rolls a whole bunch of things into one massive hyper object, but the meaning crisis is part of that stew.
It's one way to get your arms around it by conceiving of it as one thing, but of course. Yeah, so we kind of have a crisis of elders, and I'm only 42, and I was very unwise for most of my life, so I don't consider myself some like wise old elder, but I'm just relentlessly obsessed with studying psychology and studying spirituality and studying people, and it's like the great passion of my life to be able to love people and to be able to make a living doing that. And so, it feels like an honor. It feels like a real privilege to be able to do this.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your perspective on it and your journey to it. As you're moving forward from here, what are the activities that is taking shape in? I know with Rich, you're running a FightWise course, which is kind of weaving together strands of approaching conflict in a productive. This word productive, I have a quibble with it, but in a constructive way, in a healthy way, approaching conflict in a healthy way.
Yeah, we're not above. If somebody, there are moments in life when you do not need to spend so much time thinking about the well-being of the other person, and you just need to defend yourself. And we're trying to teach healthy conflict skills, certainly, but the thing that we're really primarily concerned with is people who are not standing up for themselves and who naturally fawn or flee when they are in a stressful situation. So if they like default to this kind of passivity or this kind of self-abnegation or abandonment, we're teaching them how to spot that in themselves and how to sort of recognize the somatic signal of what collapse looks like and what freeze looks like, and certainly what fawning looks like. And then we're teaching them how to reprogram that so that they stand up for themselves, so that they fight. And sometimes we hope that's going to look like something that reaffirms the relationship and asserts healthy boundaries and does all that. But sometimes you have to punch somebody in the nose, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's life. Like, it sucks, but it's what it is.
Sometimes you're just dealing with someone who, in that circumstance, is just an asshole, and you need to be like, no.
Yeah. In the Marines, we used to say that most of us, we used to say that the only thing the violent understand is greater violence. And I don't think that that's true as a blanket statement, but there are situations that devolve past a point where someone's suffering is not germane, and then there's no dignified recourse available. And so in a way, what you're sort of doing is like regressing through historical man from like the postmodern to like the age of dignity, and then you just kind of get to a point where it's like, well, now honor is on the line, and this is what we've become, is medieval. And if this is the only way to settle this thing, then this is the only way to settle this thing. And it's not nice, and nobody wants it, right? Like every religion is built as an edifice to try to avoid this from happening, but it's a necessary layer of the human psyche, is what we are. And if people need to go there in order to protect themselves, their families, their homes, things, their crucial interests, then they need to be able to go there. And that's what FightWise is really about. It's less about teaching people how to fight, and it's more about teaching people you need to fight in some circumstances. And here's how you break through the nervous system damage, the nervous system ossification that would otherwise make someone choose to abandon themselves or choose to abandon their core interests.
Yeah, this is. I mean, of course, because this is my own obsession. I'm connecting this to what I see often and is criticized historically and today by certain people in Zen and other contemplative traditions. People caught up in fawning and freezing within their own nervous system. Maybe it's not externalized, but they're fawning and freezing actually within their own practice of meditation, with their own psychological complexes that arise. Yeah. And sometimes what is needed is sharp and swift and decisive cutting through. Yes. Just and a burst of vital energy and bringing that up and moving from that, rather than this kind of timid negotiation with the knots that bind in body and mind. Sometimes you need to be able to shout.
It's true.
From your toes upwards. And
Bodhidharma brought Kung Fu with him from the subcontinent to China. This is not like the idea that like martial arts or fighting is somehow inimical to religion is crazy. Yeah. There's no historical precedent for it. But we are in a really unique time where interpersonal aggression, assertiveness, violence, even emotional violence, is deeply taboo socially. Sure. Probably more so now than it's been in a long time. And a lot of what me and Rich are trying to do is break people out of that and say, so this is empty too.
Or even just the willingness to say, I disagree with you. I think you're wrong.
Yeah,
that's so taboo in so many spaces.
It's true. Yeah, and we're not trying to enable really aggressive people, and certainly like we can spot the hotheads when they come in. I'm a sure. hothead. My path to this was really about learning to tame my own anger. Much more so than learning how to break out of fawn or freeze. Although I had to learn how to do that too. But we can spot them and we can work with them in a slightly different way. There's ways to do that. But this is primarily for people who for one reason or another have never found their backbone and have never been in an environment that wanted them to have a backbone, that wanted the best sure. for them. Because everybody, man, woman, it doesn't matter, benefits, and their community benefits and their family benefits when they know where their backbone is, when they're strong people.
I mean, quite literally embodied. You could, feel that thing.
Yeah.
There's
exactly.
structure and strength in the frame.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I have some more projects going forward. Like I'm going to Spain, where Rich lives in Barcelona, and we're going to do like an intensive deep dive into FightWise and figuring out what we want to do with it in 2025, and hopefully expand it out, maybe do an in-person retreat. There's a lot of cool stuff we can do with it. And then I'm not like totally ready to announce this publicly yet, but I've got a bunch of projects coming up for 2025 that revolve broadly around the theme of the strength of the sense of self. I actually think, I know this is a somewhat controversial take among Dharma circles, but I think that the Western psychological project of developing the personality actually aids in the transcendence of self that Dharma helps with, because the more of it you can make conscious, the more shimmering the edges become, and the clearer you can take it apart and observe it and start to figure out what that thing's made of, right?
Well, a kind of leaky
in consciousness.
A leaky, ill-defined ego structure is it's nebulous, it's unclear, it's not very visible, and it's often riddled with. I mean, speaking as someone who was that way, it's often
Yeah, me
riddled with
too. Me
self-deception.
too. Yeah, yeah. It has to be. It has to be. It can't. Yeah,
disowning one's own desires, needs, actual feelings.
yeah, yeah,
And there's just gaps between the embodied urgencies of this animal and how that
yeah.
is manipulated and acted for in the world. There's a very lossy translation between those different layers of the body and the psyche. And if that's clear and like well formed and developed, that helps.
Yeah. I think it's sort of like trying to meditate or trying to transcend a broken ego is like trying to meditate on a broken tailbone. Like you can do it, but it's gonna hurt, and you're not gonna be able to do it for
Speaking
very
for
long
myself,
at a time. Yeah.
It sucks. It sucks.
It
Sucked.
sucks.
Not
Yeah,
good.
it sucked for me too. Yeah, it was terrible. And there's a bunch of other benefits that come to this that come from this too. You can make strong leaders, you can make strong healers, you can make strong protectors, and we're at a time in culture and in history where the American sense of self is quite fractured. It's quite liquid. It's quite I presume it's similar up in Canada. You guys are sane in ways that we are not, uh, but I know that our cultural trends are married to one another. We
Yeah.
go through a lot of stuff around the same time, and something I used to talk a lot about, and I try, it's a little jargony now, but I like to say that we kind of moved from a culture of narcissism to a culture of a more sort of borderline construction where the self where the American character is now highly emotional, the self is somewhat fluid. There's an extraordinary amount of suffering that just wasn't there 40 or 50 years ago. There's a lot more like people looking to others for a sense of surety and certainty, and a lot less like grounding in the self. And so I don't mean to say everyone has borderline personality disorder any more than everyone in the 70s was a narcissist, but you could see a kind of culture-bound pathology where there was a little too much of this stuff. And right now there's a little too much of the kind of hysteria and the kind of like trauma, the kind of trauma-based wounds in psychology that you can see we have an excess of this in the American character right now. And so the projects that I'd like to work on going forward would be to start helping people really strengthen their sense of self, and to start coming up with programs a la sort of self-psychology from the 70s, but like updated in a broad way, that can really help people like start studying themselves in much greater detail and with much greater attention and much greater compassion, I hope, and then start to get a real sense of like, who the hell am I, and what is going on underneath the hood here, and why do I keep wrapping myself in the cloaks of these other identities, and why do I keep feeling emotions on behalf of a country or on behalf of a
Yeah. What is going
or
on
on
with that,
behalf of a
people?
corporation or on behalf of because look, you're going to transcend and include that. You're always going to, you're never going to stop being an American. You're never going to stop being a Canadian. It's never going to stop being an important
Well,
part of
I'm
your
both. I'm
identity.
double fucked. I mean,
See, there you go. But you can get to a point where you can take that as object, and you can certainly see the way that your identity might be manipulated, or the way that your identity might be, compromised, or whatever the case might be. You get space, right? You open up spaciousness around it. And this is my hope: is it maybe not to bring everyone to a full existential ontogenesis. I think that's like for a very small amount of people who can.
say more about what you mean by that. I can decompose the words there and get a sense of the meaning, but what does that actually mean
In
in your parlance?
in existential psychotherapy, there's sort of I don't want to say it's the tellus, but once you've addressed the initial complaint, if people want to keep going and they want to keep discovering what's going on, there's a process of defeating their self-concept over and over and over again, which is not terribly different from Zen's Great Doubt, although it doesn't go as far. Essentially, what you're trying to move people toward is a moment where there is no felt perceptual wrapping in an identity.
Right.
So there's a point where there is nothing but you, the body, not even the personality, but you, the body.
Yep.
There's nothing between that and the absolute enormity of the void, the absolute enormity of existence. And in that moment, if you have really stripped away nation and accomplishment and profession,
career and
family and every single part of the family,
and whatever,
and everything that you could retreat into, then there's nothing left, and basically one of three things theoretically happens, one of two things in reality happens. So what Nietzsche hoped, right, was that this would be, somebody would be able to stand and live in this space permanently, and this would be the Übermensch. And then what we've found is that really one of two things happens, which is that people either retreat into defense and delusion. Can't do it. Can't do it. Right? Too hard on me. And then they actually like bury and repress the experience, and it wasn't right for them, and they take the blue pill, they go back in the matrix. Right? Or they have what's called ontogenesis. They have a moment of ontogenesis. And ontogenesis means basically the beginning of belief. And so what happens is they start to feel the divine or the sacred in a palpable way.
Sure. Yeah. Not as a concept, not as a concept, not as a
dogma, not as a religion, but as a living reality. The sacred is real. There is something here. It is a complete mystery. And if you've gotten to that point, you already recognize the futility of representative thought to try and capture this or anything in the real, fundamentally. So there's this this moment of ontogenesis is really a kind of like direct, unmediated experience of the sacred. And people often, after having this, return to their religions, return to their nation, return to their jobs. It's a peak experience. But when they do, they return with a vitality and an awakeness and an aliveness.
Yeah.
You know, having felt the reality of the spirit or having felt the reality of the sacred, even if you can't use those words without a twinkle in your eye. But like, you know, you can go back to being Catholic, you can go back to being Christian, you can go back to being Muslim, you can go back, whatever. But you're doing it and you can say, I know what this stuff points to now. It doesn't point to itself, right? There is something, there is a referent to this, like outside of the kind of Wittgensteinian linguistic games where all of Logos points to itself. You sort of realize there's this context in which all of like Logos is situated all of a sudden, and you have had a direct experience of that. And so to me, like, I would like to facilitate that for other people. That's what my mentor did for me. This is why I think that I tend to resonate really well with Zen people, even though I have spent very little time. You know, I've never been at a Zen monastery or anything like that. There's just a lot of overlap in that sort of process. And it's just something I would like to help other people do. And I actually, I have no desire to capture their identity afterwards and be like, yes, now come be part of my religion or come be part of my institution or yeah, exactly. It's kind of like, now go back to the Unitarian Church, go back to the Catholic Church, go back to the synagogue and go, revitalize it. Like, you felt God, go do it, go revitalize it. You know, because I think this experience is not, I think anyone can do it, but everyone will not. And there are a lot of people that aren't ever going to get the environment or the support or just have the right time in life when they have those things that are going to go on to have this experience. And they actually need institutional identity, and they actually need dogma, and they actually need they need their churches, they need their communities. You know, like we're in a huge spiritual crisis because Christianity has failed in many ways to stay vital and to continue ministering to America's spiritual needs. And I think the best way to tackle the meta crisis, this would be a very controversial thing to say, and I don't care, is to help Christianity revitalize itself. Is to help Christians rediscover the lily of the field, and
I mean, it's what, 1.3, 1.5 billion people. If we get,
yeah.
I mean, that's
yeah. So I myself feel itchy when I cross the threshold of a Catholic church. It's not right for me. I can tell, like, this isn't where I belong anymore. But but I have great love and respect for the faith, and if I can help somebody have a direct experience of God, like a direct mystical experience of God, and send them back to their church, I think I've done an unqualified good for them and for their community. And
I would think so. I think I got the wrong number there. It's more than 1.3 or 1.5 billion. It
might be 2 billion.
Many Christians.
Yeah, it might be 2 or 2.5 billion. I think it's more than 2 billion.
Yeah. And it's a smaller percentage who kind of erect cults and social structures for the relentless pursuit of living only and completely from that moment of ontogenesis.
Yes. Yeah.
Which, as I've experienced it in more traditional and rigorous, like contemplative Buddhist settings, that's what they're after, which is a truly insane pursuit.
It's a truly insane pursuit. Yes.
But some of us were, hopeless and helpless, and that's all there is for us.
Me too.
So,
yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think, and I mean, Irvin Yalom is probably the most famous existential psychotherapist. He was a therapist and an author that wrote some pretty lovely books back in the 70s and 80s. And he was very clear and very clear-eyed. And I think most therapists are pretty clear-eyed that, like, therapy, broadly speaking, is something that has helped the upper classes and has been available to the upper classes because it's very intensive, it's very labor intensive, and so it's very financially intensive.
Yeah.
It's not possible to do this work, and it's not possible to, it's not sustainable to do this work free, or even low cost. Like every therapist who follows the APA guidelines gives 25% of their time to low income clients and patients. I do, even though I'm not part of the APA. That's, to me, just seems important. But that said, you're still 75% of your time is still going to the upper classes. It's still going to people who can pay for it, who can afford to pay for it. And that means that this is a rarefied faith. And you can actually see this, right? That, like, psychotherapy and Buddhism too are largely practiced by the elites of society. Yeah,
it's a weird amalgam. A new religion really is like therapeutic Buddhism, which is quite different in my experience from the cult of awakening.
Yes.
It's a different social set.
Because and we could go off on this for a really long time, but there's the entry point for most people is this kind of desire to possess techne, to perfect the self, to win capitalism, or to hit.
Good luck, but
exactly. Well, the worst part is what happens to you if you do.
Well, I mean, we can look around.
It's like
at
the loneliest, saddest place in the world.
I mean, that's not what I imagined as a fulfilling life personally. But
no, it's not. And every story in our culture reinforces this over and over. But people, have to learn. They have to learn the hard way. And okay, that's fine. So, but like I call it like Western Dharma, but it's this sort of mix of like psychotherapy, Buddhism, and psychedelics. That is a religion that everyone follows, and you can even go and hear Dharma talks at Zen centers.
Yes,
where they'll be talking about this stuff, and they're not talking about, Zen.
Crushing one's bones.
I've been
dying the great death. But this is X is not Y here.
Yeah. When I took my trip around the country. Earlier this year, I road tripped the United States. That was my little empty nest gift to myself. Made a little mobile monastery and lived on the road for 8 months. Um, and I stopped off at spiritual centers in most of the places that I went to, and every single one of these spiritual centers was practicing Western Dharma along with, or sometimes in place of, whatever the lineage that they said they were from.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
So that's the religion. That's what people are practicing, and okay, that's where we're at. This is the new folk thing that's coming up, and so stuff that so the thing that obviously I'm concerned about, and which has been like, which has been an observation that's been pretty clear, and people have been making since the 60s or 70s, is that New Age spirituality terminates in narcissism. They mistake the development of the personality. They mistake true individuality, true interindividuality, which is much closer to the Mahayana belief of interconnectedness and unity. If you really go and really find the actual outlines of your individuality, you find it's totally indistinct from your environment, from your relationships, from your community. You are made up of all these other things, and trying to find the line of where you end and where you begin is a fool's errand. But that's not where most New Age spirituality takes people. Where most New Age spirituality takes people is like, let's give you some holy feelings, let's make you feel powerful, let's get you better at your job. And they end up trapped in this kind of glass case of, I don't know why I can't care about myself, my family, my friends, everyone around me. And it wasn't really their fault. It was like spiritually induced narcissism. I don't know if it wasn't their fault, but they're part of their environment. They're part of that system. They're part of that. That's what's happening, and that's where it's depositing people. And something I really would like to see happen is a push toward community service, and a push toward like things like the Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco, where Buddhist practitioners are learning to go sit with the dead and the dying, or sit with the dying in particular. What kind of Maranasati practices are we getting at the local yoga studio? It's not happening.
The Buddha encouraged people literally to go to the charnel ground and sit with, burning and rotting corpses. He wasn't kidding.
He wasn't kidding. Yeah. And it's so there's I guess the other part here, and maybe I'm sorry if I'm like up on a soapbox, but I feel very passionate about this right now.
No. Go for it.
And so a little bit of my Catholicism is going to show here. My artificial intelligence is eating the world. We're all sort of watching that happen. I'm not as sold that everyone's going to lose their jobs and money is going to disappear as a concept in 5 years and all that stuff. I don't believe all that. But I do think that there is going to be a massive shift in the economy. There's going to be a massive shift in what humans can do, where we can find meaningful work. And the sort of last place I can think of that AI can replace human beings is in what I think of as sacramental work.
Yeah.
So, so birth, marriage, death, divorce, rites of passage in life where you're going through extraordinary pain, extraordinary transformation, extraordinary suffering. You need a human being to be there with you. You need someone not just with a regulated nervous system, but with someone who's done some of their own suffering and sat with it and gone through it, and who's met that in themselves and can meet it in you with compassion and space. And so I would like to see, and the project that I'm working on, which like I said, I'm not totally ready to announce yet, is really about like almost like a sacramental academy, almost like starting to build an organization that trains doulas, that trains death doulas, that trains counselors, that trains people who may get displaced by AI, into continuing to help other human beings with these sort of sacramental times of life and in doing community service. If we do get the sort of weirdest AI timeline and everybody gets a UBI and there's no more, no more like wealth generation or whatever, then like what else is there at that point left but spiritual wealth and spiritual death?
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm hoping this organization will serve as. It's still very much in like the beginning, early plots, and I'm still, lining up suckers, I mean people to be on the board and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not ready to not ready to put it out there yet, but it's coming. It's coming, and I'm very excited about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, their culture and people's general well-being and sense of meaning, integration, community, sense of themselves, their place in the world, where this whole world system is headed, is already in such a chaotic spin, and it's only accelerating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When my own, several of my own teachers, talking with them about how they see their role actually as lineage holders, and partially it's like a conservative role of maintaining their lineages and passing that on down
Mm-hmm.
generations, which is necessary and wonderful. And partially
Important.
they explicitly speak to, I want to institute places where there's, well, the chaos of the world is ongoing, and for those who are called, this is a harbor, this is a refuge,
Yeah.
for training, to give them the capacities. Well, first to give people a refuge, and tools to handle the internal chaos that is spun up by the. I mean, look around.
Yeah.
And then hopefully that those people can be available for others, in acceleratingly disrupted times, economically, socially, politically.
Yeah.
So, all hands on deck.
It's not going to get any. It's not going to get any less weird or less
I don't think
chaotic.
so.
Technology's never going to grow slower than it is right now.
Well, and unless there's a
You
full
know.
collapse of industrial civilization, which it's not out of the question.
Yeah, but when civilizations collapse, it's slow and it's from the outside in. So it's probably not going to happen in our lifetime. It's going to look like a slow. It's going to look like a slow inability of. It's going to look like a slow failure of state capacity, starting in the rural areas, which we're watching.
Yeah.
And it'll start to roll. Yeah, it'll start to roll through exurbs soon, and it'll start to roll through. It'll look like collapsing state capacity and that sort of thing. And that's not a fait accompli. Like that can be reversed. We're not. The Huns are not at the door. Like it's still. The empire is not dead, but it is starting to roll back, and those things
the
are
empire
starting
didn't
to
collapse when the Huns came through. I mean, they were a major threat and destabilized them, but it took another, I think, 2 centuries for things to really collapse. So
that's what I mean. That's what I mean. So like in our lifetimes, like I don't think we're going to see that collapse of industrial civilization, or it won't be a huge
upheaval and uneven disruption. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I think.
I think that's right. We're already seeing that. The future is arriving, but it's not evenly distributed.
Wonderful quote. Who said that? Who originated that?
I think that was Rune. I want to credit him because he's my friend, but I don't know.
I feel like that comes from someplace else, but whatever. It's a great quote. Okay. Whoever originated it.
I just want to give it to Teapot.
Okay. Yeah. Well. Well, now it's at the point now where I feel like this cultural cluster is influential enough that you wonder, like how many times has someone trawled Teapot and then it shows up in some more mainstream publication without credit.
That's fine. That's what it's for. Yeah, I don't know, man. I had a moment. Actually, it was Rich Bartlett pointed this out to me, where we were sort of like looking at, there was, when creator payouts started, we were sort of looking at like views and impressions and all this kind of stuff. And he pointed out like, oh, more people read you every month than The Atlantic.
That's nuts.
And I was like, that's nut. And that like my stomach churned all of a sudden. And I was like, what the fuck? And yeah, like so it's Twitter, right? So on the one hand, how seriously are people taking this? What is our actual cultural reach? There is no way to like measure this. I think Rich put it best. He basically said like Teapot has the reach of a popular TV show.
Which is not nothing.
That's not nothing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's pretty great. I do think probably the most meaningful my consequences, the most meaningful stuff that's come out of the last 4 years of writing about my own fucked up stuff online and spirituality and psychology and all that stuff is like the sheer amount of people that just come up to me when I meet them in person or meet them at events or whatever and just say like this tweet changed something for me or this tweet like healed something for me or this whatever, that's like made the whole thing worth it. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really bizarre. I mean, when I got my first cell phone, because my parents wanted me to have one so that, they could get me, or like I could phone them in an emergency or they could phone me in an emergency. I was like, I don't want this. And then like my friend started asking me for my phone number. Like, I don't want you to be able to contact me. No, I'm not giving you my phone number. Why do you want that? No. So I was very, very, very resistant actually as the social media era came in. Like I stayed off Facebook for the longest time. Just like I could feel the tentacles reaching in and disrupting my individuation and self formation. I'm like, but here we are. I now appreciate much more than even 5 years ago the upsides, which it's a mixed bag as are all things.
It is a mixed bag. You have a great account though. I think you're putting great stuff out there.
Well, I try with and the occasional shit post as well, or
but that's
argument
like,
in the
part
comments.
And parcel. Yeah. Probably the most distressing thing about is like about tweeting for me, at least lately, has been if you speak with any kind of authority or confidence about spiritual matters, people will start to project guru vibes onto you, or they'll start to project like teacher vibes onto you. And it's like strenuous denials help a lot. Like, hey, like actually I'm a guy, and if you knew how lost I was for so many years, and if you knew how imperfect and screwed up I still am, like I'm writing this stuff not because I'm like a really excellent, morally good guy. I'm writing this stuff because I've been a huge idiot, and like I've learned the hard way that like sin is its own punishment. That like going against yourself and hurting people and hurting yourself and all this stuff is its own punishment. It leads you to hell. And like that's where I'm writing out of. It's not trying to I'm not trying to be John the Baptist out here or anything. I'm just trying to like not trying to not suffer so much.
Maida Roshi, who may be quoting one of his own teachers here, yes, you're intrinsically Buddha, no question, no doubt, and you still suck.
Yeah,
we all still suck.
Yeah, 100%.
Or a friend of his. So you've experienced Great Awakening. Maybe you can even live from it a little bit, and you're living it out just a bit. You're still just another. You're just an awakened bozo on the bus. Like big whoop! Congratulations.
Congratulations! Yeah.
Yeah. No. I mean, shit still stinks. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so something I like about therapeutic Buddhism or Western Dharma is there is a real psychological literacy I see in our generation of meditators and contemplatives that is sometimes feels itchy or allergic to older contemplatives and meditators. I see them, often kind of having an allergy to psychology or an allergy to psychological explanations for things. And what, as far as I can tell, what that results in is a kind of like inability to recognize the like ways that unconscious forces are still acting on you, even if you've had your great awakening, or even if you've had, and we've seen teachers who are, sexually abusing students.
You don't have to look hard.
You don't have to look hard. Yeah, exactly. You know, like or seeing prostitutes or whatever. And it's like, well, okay, like I actually seeing prostitutes to me it seems like much less of a big deal than like hurting people. But the thing is, you know, like you take a teacher who's hurting people, who's abusing people, who's whatever, and you put them in therapy with a good therapist and have them say, here's every fucked up teenage hormonal fantasy that I had. Here's every bizarre kink that's ever passed my head, and here's every violent fantasy I've ever had, and have the therapist go, yeah, yeah, okay, yeah. What are you going to do about it? You know, where are you gonna put this in your life so that it doesn't repress and pop up somewhere else and hurt someone? You know, and like that's Western psychotherapy's genius. Like that's what it's really good at. You know, so like I'm really glad that we're getting a generation with literacy in both because I think it's going to help round out. You know, the failures of Western psychotherapy are well elucidated. I don't need to go in them here, but like good quality spirituality ameliorates most of them, I think. And the failures of like Dharma and Dharma instruction are pretty well elucidated. I don't need to do them here, but therapy helps a
You can have
lot.
profound perceptual transformations and still be wildly behaviorally misaligned, turns out.
Yes.
Oops.
Yes. Oops. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's nothing that's ever going to get you to a point where you're perfect or you don't hurt people or you don't whatever, but you can certainly like avoid catastrophically ruining other people's lives, and you can certainly, and you know, you do this by incorporating your unconscious. You do this by stopping repressing and starting to take it seriously, you know.
All right. Sweeping out the basement. All for it.
Yeah.
Hmm. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to circle back to, or that you'd like to bring up anew? We're clocking in a little over an hour here. How you feeling?
Gosh, I don't know. You've thrown me so many great alley oops. Like you know,
That's my role as the host here.
you're killing it. I feel like that's most of the stuff that's on my mind these days. Um,
All right.
you know.
Well, an absolute delight to have you on. Where should I direct people to go if they want to learn more? I mean, your Twitter, obviously, but
Yeah.
where else? Is there a website, or where should I point people?
I would really like to have people just come to um, just search for Vivid Void on Twitter and come follow me. And in terms of the projects that I've got coming up, I'm going to make announcements about all of that in 2025. So if that's something that's interesting or you're into it, send me a DM. My DMs are open to everybody, and I'll get your name on a list. And you know, if you're one of those people out there that's like really into Dharma or really into spirituality, and you see this same need for service, you see the same need for interconnectedness, then like yeah, get a hold of me on Twitter and let's team up. We're about to do some great
Okay,
stuff this year.
exciting. All right. Thanks, Gabe. VV. Thanks everybody for
Thanks,
tuning
Wiston.
in. Take
Yeah.
care.